see, there he gets the head, starts to apply the pressure real hard, keeping...
Kazushi Sakuraba became the hero of Japanese MMA by surviving men that were built to destroy him. But somewhere along the way, survival slowly turned into resentment. The Pride era was not built for longevity. It was built for violence. Tokyo Dome crowds watched exhausted fighters collapse against the ropes while blood spread across the white canvas. Soccer kicks landed without mercy. Injured men kept fighting because there was no other choice. Fear inside those arenas felt real, and nobody carried that burden longer than Kazushi Sakuraba. To fans, Sakuraba looked harmless. He smiled, joked around, and never looked like a traditional killer. But inside the ring, he became Japan's greatest survivor. He fought giants, destroyed the Gracie myth, and turned himself into the emotional symbol of Pride FC. But some rivalries never ended when the bell rang. Some men shattered pieces of his body that never healed. Some humiliated him in front of his own people. Others made him realize that Pride would keep sacrificing him as long as the audience continued cheering. These were not simply opponents. These were the men Kazushi Sakuraba carried with him long after the fights were over. Before we begin the story, we need to understand who Kazushi Sakuraba truly was. Born in 1969 in Akita, Japan, Kazushi Sakuraba never looked like the future face of MMA. He was not built like a heavyweight monster, did not carry the intimidating aura of a knockout artist, and rarely looked dangerous standing across from elite fighters. Before the fame of Pride, Sakuraba came through amateur wrestling and the brutal Japanese professional wrestling system, where toughness mattered more than comfort and injuries were treated like part of the job. What made Sakuraba different was his mind. His movement looked awkward, almost careless at times, but underneath it was one of the smartest grappling brains the sport had ever seen. He attacked from strange angles, baited opponents into mistakes, and stayed calm in chaos. During the rise of Pride in the late 1990s, he became something nobody expected. He became the Gracie Hunter. Victories over Royler Gracie, Renzo Gracie, Ryan Gracie, and especially the legendary 90-minute war against Royce Gracie turned Sakuraba into a national hero in Japan. To many fans, he represented more than MMA. He represented Japanese pride against the myth of invincible Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But fame inside Pride came with a brutal cost. Sakuraba constantly fought injured. His knees, shoulders, ears, and spine absorbed years of punishment. He accepted impossible fights against larger opponents while Pride continued building entire events around his willingness to suffer. By the early 2000s, the smiling entertainer fans loved was slowly becoming a physically broken man behind the scenes. The violence that made him famous also changed him forever. Number 5. Ryan Gracie. Ryan Gracie was different from the rest of the Gracie family, and people inside Pride knew it immediately. By the time he faced Kazushi Sakuraba at Pride Shockwave in 2002, Sakuraba had already embarrassed multiple members of the Gracie dynasty. In Japan, he had become the man who shattered the illusion that the Gracies could not be beaten. But for Ryan, this rivalry felt personal in a way that went far beyond competition. Unlike Royce or Renzo, Ryan carried a reputation that made even experienced fighters uncomfortable. Stories about violent behavior outside the ring followed him for years. Locker rooms talked about his temper quietly. Promoters knew he was unpredictable. There was genuine tension surrounding him before the fight even began. And in the emotionally charged atmosphere of Pride, where national pride already fueled every Japan versus Brazil matchup, Ryan entered the arena looking less like a martial artist and more like someone arriving for revenge. The fight itself quickly became ugly. Ryan fought with reckless aggression, constantly trying to overwhelm Sakuraba physically. But Sakuraba stayed composed and slowly dragged the fight into deeper water. By the second round, Ryan's frustration became obvious. Sakuraba controlled the pace, forced grappling exchanges, and eventually caught him in a Kimura submission. To the audience, it looked like another legendary victory for the Gracie Hunter. But beneath the surface, this rivalry left behind a darker feeling. Years later, many people around Pride still described Ryan as one of the most unstable personalities the organization ever dealt with. Sakuraba rarely spoke emotionally about opponents, but fighters from that era understood something important. Some men were dangerous because of their skills. Ryan Gracie felt dangerous even before the fight started. That psychological tension changed the atmosphere entirely. There was no mutual respect, no sportsmanship narrative, and no feeling of martial arts honor surrounding the rivalry. It felt hostile from beginning to end. And in an era already filled with violence, Ryan Gracie brought a different kind of fear into the ring. Number 4. Royce Gracie. For many fans, the rivalry between Royce Gracie and Kazushi Sakuraba defined the entire early Pride era. It was bigger than a normal fight. It felt like a war between two philosophies. Brazil believed the Gracies had already proven jiu-jitsu was unbeatable. Japan believed Sakuraba represented something tougher, stranger, and impossible to break. By the time they met at Pride Grand Prix 2000, the pressure surrounding Sakuraba had become enormous. He was carrying the expectations of an entire country against the most famous family in MMA history. Royce entered the fight with the aura of a legend. Sakuraba entered with the reputation of a survivor who never stopped moving forward, no matter how much damage he absorbed. The fight lasted 90 exhausting minutes. Inside the arena, the atmosphere slowly changed from excitement into disbelief. The crowd watched two exhausted men continue fighting, long after most human bodies would have quit. Sweat covered the canvas. Breathing became heavy. Royce's corner looked increasingly desperate as Sakuraba continued attacking the legs and forcing endless scrambles. There was no explosive knockout, no dramatic celebration, only physical deterioration unfolding in real time. Eventually, the Gracie corner threw in the towel. Japan exploded with emotion. Sakuraba had done the impossible. He defeated the man most fans believed could never truly lose. But the victory came with a hidden cost that followed him for years. That fight transformed Sakuraba into something dangerous for Pride itself. The organization realized he could survive punishment far beyond normal limits. And once promoters believe a fighter can survive anything, they stop protecting him. Bigger opponents arrived. Short-notice fights arrived. Injuries stopped mattering. Sakuraba became the man expected to sacrifice himself for the spectacle of Pride. The Royce-Gracie fight made him immortal. It also marked the beginning of the physical destruction that slowly consumed the rest of his career. Number 3. Mirko Cro Cop. When Mirko Cro Cop entered Pride, fighters immediately understood something terrifying was happening. He was not chaotic like many heavy strikers of that era. He was controlled, calm, precise. The former Croatian anti-terrorist unit member carried himself with the cold discipline of a soldier, and his left high kick quickly became the most feared weapon in MMA. By the time he faced Kazushi Sakuraba at Pride FC in 2001, Sakuraba's body was already deteriorating. Years of wars against the Gracies and non-stop Pride pressure had damaged him physically, but he still accepted dangerous fights because that was what Pride demanded from its biggest Japanese star. Cro Cop, meanwhile, looked enormous compared to him. Faster, stronger, more explosive. Even before the opening bell, the size difference felt uncomfortable to watch. Inside Saitama Super Arena, the atmosphere became tense almost immediately. Every time Cro Cop lifted his left leg, the crowd reacted with fear. Sakuraba kept trying to close distance, searching for takedowns and awkward grappling exchanges, but Cro Cop's striking felt violent in a completely different way from anything Sakuraba had experienced before. This was not wild brawling. This was systematic destruction. Then came the damage. Cro Cop shattered Sakuraba's orbital bone with strikes that visibly changed his face during the fight. Doctors examined him between rounds while blood continued pouring around the damaged eye. Sakuraba stayed on the stool trying to continue, but the injury had already become too severe. Eventually, the fight was stopped. For Japanese fans, it felt horrifying. Their hero looked helpless for one of the first times in Pride, and that humiliation carried a deeper meaning behind the scenes. Sakuraba may not have personally hated Cro Cop himself, but many people from that era believed he grew bitter about the role Pride forced him into. He constantly accepted fights against naturally bigger men because the company needed him to save cards, attract ratings, and represent Japan against foreign killers. Against Cro Cop, the cost of that sacrifice became impossible to hide anymore. Number 12. Wanderlei Silva. Wanderlei Silva was not simply another Pride champion. During the early 2000s, he became the face of violence inside the organization. The shaved head, the cold stare, the non-stop forward pressure, and the brutal soccer kicks made him feel less like a fighter and more like a weapon Pride unleashed on people. And unfortunately for Kazushi Sakuraba, Pride kept sending him directly into that nightmare. Their rivalry began at Pride 13 in 2000. At the time, Sakuraba was still carrying the emotional momentum of defeating the Gracies, while Wanderlei was evolving into the most terrifying striker in the company. The atmosphere before the fight felt deeply uncomfortable for Japanese fans. Sakuraba represented courage and heart. Wanderlei represented destruction without mercy. Once the fight started, the difference in physical damage became obvious almost immediately. Wanderlei attacked with relentless pressure, knees to the head, violent hooks in the clinch, soccer kicks whenever Sakuraba hit the canvas. There was no space to breathe against him. Sakuraba kept trying to survive through movement and grappling exchanges, but Wanderlei's aggression never slowed down. By the end, Sakuraba looked physically exhausted and badly damaged. But the worst part was that it did not end there. Pride booked them against each other again at Pride 25, and later at Pride Final Conflict 2003. Every time the rivalry returned, the atmosphere became darker. Japanese audiences desperately wanted Sakuraba to overcome the monster standing in front of him, but Wanderlei kept dismantling him with brutal efficiency. One fight ended after repeated knees to the head. Another left Sakuraba battered beyond recognition. Over time, the rivalry stopped feeling competitive. It started feeling tragic. Each Wanderlei fight took away another piece of Sakuraba's body. His movement became slower. The injuries piled up. The punishment became impossible to fully recover from. Yet pride continued putting him back into these wars because the audience could not stop watching. That is what made this rivalry so painful. Wanderlei Silva did not just defeat Sakuraba. He became the symbol of how violently the Pride era consumed its own heroes. Number 1. Hidehiko Yoshida. Hidehiko Yoshida was never supposed to become one of the most bitter chapters in Kazushi Sakuraba's career. On paper, this was supposed to be a celebration for Japanese combat sports. An Olympic gold medalist in judo facing the greatest Japanese MMA icon of the Pride era. Two national heroes. Two completely different worlds colliding inside the same ring. But by the time they fought at Pride Total Elimination 2002, the pressure surrounding the matchup had already become dangerous. Japanese media treated the fight like a national event. Yoshida carried Olympic prestige and mainstream respect. Sakuraba carried the emotional loyalty of hardcore Pride fans who believed he represented the soul of old-school MMA. The rivalry immediately divided audiences across Japan. Some supported discipline and tradition through Yoshida. Others believed Sakuraba embodied real fighting spirit because of everything he had already survived inside Pride. The fight itself quickly became awkward and tense. Yoshida constantly pressured forward, searching for throws and clinch control, while Sakuraba tried to create scrambles and defensive movement from underneath. Neither man looked comfortable. The crowd inside Saitama sensed it too. Instead of feeling like a spectacular showdown, the fight slowly became frustrating, physical, and emotionally uncomfortable. Then came the stoppage. While trapped in Yoshida's gi choke attempt, Sakuraba appeared to lose consciousness for a brief moment. Referee Yuji Shimada immediately stopped the fight, but almost instantly, Sakuraba protested. He argued that he was still awake and capable of continuing. Replays only made the controversy worse. Some believed the stoppage saved him from serious danger. Others believed the referee panicked too quickly because of Yoshida's status as an Olympic hero. The backlash exploded across Japan. For Sakuraba, the humiliation went far beyond losing a fight. This was one of the few moments in Pride where he genuinely seemed angry afterward. Not theatrical anger. Real bitterness. He believed the fight had been taken away from him unfairly in front of his own people. And maybe that was what hurt the most. After surviving brutal wars against foreign killers for years, one of the deepest emotional scars of Sakuraba's career came from another Japanese legend standing across the ring from him. The Pride era is gone now. Tokyo Dome no longer feels the same. The white canvas that once carried blood, fear, and exhaustion has become part of old fight footage, watched through grainy VHS tapes and fading YouTube clips. New generations talk about statistics, rankings, and pound-for-pound debates. But men like Kazushi Sakuraba came from a completely different world. A world where fighters entered tournaments injured because they needed the money. A world where soccer kicks could end careers in seconds. A world where surviving mattered more than protecting your legacy. Sakuraba survived all of it. He survived the Gracies. He survived Mirko Cro Cop. He survived Wanderlei Silva, and some of the damaged knees stayed. The surgeries stayed. The scars stayed. And maybe that is why his rivalries still feel so emotional today. These were not clean professional sports rivalries built for television drama. They were brutal collisions between exhausted men carrying pressure, pride, fear, and physical damage into the ring night after night. The crowd remembered the Gracie Hunter. They remembered the smile, the awkward style, and the unbelievable courage. But like many old-school fighters, Sakuraba carried far more out of the Pride era than victories alone. History remembered the legend. His body remembered everything else.